Hello! There's this one night I think about way too often, and not just because of what happened, but because of how it made me feel. Like the floor had dropped out from under my world. Like I'd suddenly stepped into someone else's life, one I never thought I'd get to live. It all started with a pool game. I've known Evan for 3 years. We weren't best friends or anything dramatic like that. We worked together, same shift at this dingy downtown bar, The Lantern. He was a bartender. I was usually bussing tables or covering the register when someone flaked. We'd shoot the shit during downtime, talk trash during slow hours, nothing serious. But over time, we got comfortable. He had this dry, sarcastic sense of humor that I weirdly liked, and a cocky little smirk that he probably didn't even know he used. He was tall, kind of lanky but toned, with messy dark blonde hair that always looked like he'd just rolled out of bed. Most people would call him straight. I did too. He was always flirting with the girls who sat at the bar too long. He even dated a couple of them. And me? I kept that part of myself pretty private. I wasn't hiding, but I also wasn't advertising. Not in a place like The Lantern, where guys still used gay as a punchline. Anyway, we had this running thing after our shifts. A couple of beers, maybe a late night bite if the diner next door was still open, and a game or two of pool in the back of the bar. Evan always won. Always. It became a joke. Me talking trash, him letting me think I was getting better, then wiping the floor with me. But that night, God, that night was different. It had been unusually dead for a Thursday. We closed early, cleaned up faster than usual, music still playing low through the speakers. I was leaning against the bar nursing my beer, and Evan had that look in his eye, the one he always got when he wanted to keep the night going. "You up for a game?" he asked, grabbing a couple of cues. I shrugged. "Sure, if you're okay with crushing my soul again," he smirked. Wouldn't miss it. We headed to the back. The pool table was lit by a single overhead light that made everything else feel shadowy and private. I chalked my cue, took a sip of my beer, and broke. We played a few rounds. He won 2, I barely squeaked by on the 3rd thanks to a lucky bank shot. The whole time we were talking crap, laughing, bumping shoulders between shots. It was normal. Familiar. Easy. Until it wasn't. I don't remember what joke I made. Something about how he only wins because he distracts me with that smug little face. He laughed, leaned against the table, and said, "You like my face that much, huh?" It wasn't the words that did it. It was how he said it. His voice lower. Slower. Like he was testing something. I raised an eyebrow, trying to keep it light. "Please, you wish." "Maybe I do," he said, almost too casually. I blinked, stared at him, thought maybe I misheard. But he didn't look away, just held my gaze with this calm, unreadable expression. And suddenly, I wasn't sure what game we were playing anymore. "Evan," I said, quieter than I meant to. "You messing with me right now?" He stepped around the table, close enough that I could smell the leftover whiskey on his breath. His eyes didn't waver. Do I look like I'm joking? My mouth went dry. My brain scrambled for something clever, something safe. But all I managed was, "You're not exactly the guy that first expected to say that." "Yeah," he said, inching just a little closer. "Maybe I'm not the guy you think I am." The cue slipped from my hand. I didn't notice until I heard it clatter to the floor. "Then who are you?" I asked. He reached out, brushed his fingers along the edge of my sleeve, just barely touching. But it was enough to set off a fire under my skin. His voice was quiet when he said, "I don't know, but maybe you could help me figure it out." Evan's words hung in the air, thick and impossible to ignore. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I didn't know what I was expecting when I asked him who he was. Not that. Not this. I should have said something. Joked it off. Made fun of him. Anything to diffuse the moment. But I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen, while his fingers lingered against the fabric of my sleeve like he was waiting for permission to go further. Finally, I found my voice. "Are you drunk?" He smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Couple beers. You've seen me drunk. This isn't that." I searched his face for any trace of irony or playfulness, but all I saw was something raw. Honest. He looked nervous? That threw me even more. Evan wasn't the nervous type. "You're serious," I said, not really a question. "I think I am," he said, stepping back just slightly, giving me space. "Look, man, I don't know what this is. I don't even know if it is anything. But lately I've been, thinking about stuff. About you." That hit me square in the chest. I sat down on the edge of the pool table without saying anything, trying to process what I was hearing. Evan ran a hand through his hair, paced a few steps like he was working something out in his head. "I'm probably screwing everything up by saying this," he muttered. "Maybe," I said honestly, "but you've already said it." He stopped pacing. "So now what?" Good question. The room felt smaller now, not in a bad way. More like it was closing in around the two of us, forcing the moment to stretch and fill every corner of the space. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time without holding back. The slope of his jaw, the hint of freckles under his eyes, the way his arms crossed like he was shielding himself. "You know I've had a thing for you, right?" I asked quietly. His eyes snapped to mine. "No, I guessed. Sometimes. But I didn't want to assume." I nodded slowly. "Well, I did. For a while." His mouth opened, like he wanted to say something, but he stopped himself. Instead, he crossed the room and stood in front of me, close enough that our knees brushed. "I don't want to pretend anymore," he said. That sentence cracked something wide open in me, because pretending, keeping things friendly, professional, neutral, was all I'd done since the day we met. And here he was, ready to toss it aside like it wasn't a big deal. I reached out, hesitated, then let my fingers rest on the side of his hip. His breath hitched just slightly and I felt his body tense, then relax. "We can take it slow," I said. Evan nodded, leaning in until his forehead rested lightly against mine. "I'd like that." We didn't kiss. Not that night. I think that's what made it feel so real. There was no rush to tear each other's clothes off, no dramatic declarations, no movie scene music playing in the background. Just that quiet closeness. His forehead resting against mine, our breath mingling in the space between us. After a long moment, Evan pulled back slightly, his hand finding its way to my shoulder. "This feels weird," he said with a small, almost embarrassed laugh. "Yeah," I agreed. "Weird good or weird terrible?" "Definitely not terrible." I let out a slow breath. "Then let's just figure it out." That night, we sat on the floor of the bar, backs against the wall, finishing our beers in silence. Every now and then, our shoulders would touch, and neither of us pulled away. The conversation drifted into other things, work, music, dumb customer stories, but there was a shift, like we'd opened a door we couldn't close again. And maybe neither of us wanted to. When we finally said goodnight in the parking lot, he gave me a look before getting into his car. Not a loaded look, just honest. I watched his taillights disappear down the road and stood there way too long, just trying to wrap my head around everything. The next few days were a mix of completely normal and completely not. At work, we still joked around and played off each other like always. But behind the bar, when our hands brushed, we'd pause a second too long. During closing, he'd ask me to stay a little later, like he didn't want the night to end. Then came the night we walked out together again, both of us avoiding the obvious. "You want to come back to mine?" he asked, casually, too casually, like he was offering me a ride and not opening the next chapter of something we hadn't even named yet. I hesitated, but not because I didn't want to, just because I didn't want to mess it up. "Yeah," I said, "I do." Evan's apartment was small and quiet. We stood awkwardly in his living room for a few seconds, the sound of the door clicking shut behind us hanging in the air. "You want a drink, or—" he started. "No," I interrupted, stepping closer. "I think I just want to—" He didn't wait for me to finish, just closed the space between us and kissed me. It was tentative at first, soft, testing, but it didn't stay that way. When I pressed back, his hands found my waist, pulling me in with this quiet desperation that surprised me. He kissed like someone who'd been thinking about it for a long time, but never let himself believe it could actually happen. When we finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine again, same as that night by the pool table. "That was—" he breathed. "Yeah," I said, smiling like an idiot. "That was—" We didn't go any further, not that night. Instead, we sat on his couch, legs tangled under a blanket, watching some dumb action movie we weren't even paying attention to. Every few minutes, one of us would look at the other and just smile. It was the slowest burn of my life, and it felt perfect. Things didn't magically fall into place after that. There were awkward days, weird moments, the kind where we both didn't know how to act because we weren't just coworkers anymore. And we weren't quite boyfriends either. We were something in between, and that in-between space was confusing. Evan was quieter at work the next shift. Not cold, not distant, just more thoughtful, like he was walking through fog in his own head. I caught him staring at me once when he thought I wasn't looking, and when our eyes met, he just smiled. Small, real. That helped. But still, we didn't talk about what came next. We just existed in this limbo of glances and shared smirks and accidental touches that weren't so accidental anymore. Then one night, during a lull at the bar, I finally asked, "So what are we doing?" I said it casually, like I wasn't holding my breath waiting for his answer. Evan wiped down the bar, slower than necessary, then looked up at me. "What do you want to be doing?" That threw me. I didn't expect him to flip it back on me. "I don't know," I admitted. "I just don't want to pretend we're not doing something." He nodded, leaning on the bar. "Yeah, me neither." There was a pause, one of those weighty, meaningful silences that hang between two people when everything's about to change. "I like this," he said. "Us." I felt something ease in my chest, like I had been holding a breath for days without realizing. "But I'm figuring it out," he added. "All of it. What it means. Who I am. You cool with that?" It wasn't the kind of line that belonged in a fairy tale, but it was honest, and that meant more to me than any label he could have thrown on it. "Yeah," I said. "I'm cool with that." We kept it simple. We didn't announce anything. We didn't change how we acted around other people. But between us, things started to shift. I'd catch him watching me across the bar. He'd steal a fry off my plate during our breaks, smirking like it was our little thing. He'd lean against me on the walk to our cars, just enough to feel it, not enough to be obvious. And then there was the night he showed up at my apartment unannounced, holding 2 tacos and a 6-pack. "I was thinking about you," he said by way of explanation. We ended up on my couch, food untouched, his head on my shoulder as we watched old reruns of a show neither of us really liked. I kept waiting for the tension, for something to go wrong, but it didn't. We just fit. He kissed me again that night, slower this time, more sure. And when we fell asleep, curled up under my thin throw blanket, it was the best sleep I'd had in years. If there was a defining moment, one where I realized we'd crossed the point of no return, it wasn't some big dramatic scene. It was a Tuesday night. I'd had a crap day. Everything went wrong. Client canceled a freelance project last minute, my apartment building had a water issue, and then I spilled coffee all over my pants right before my shift. I showed up at the bar half wet, half pissed off, and fully over it. Evan took one look at me and raised an eyebrow. "You look like you lost a fight with your espresso machine." "Don't," I muttered, tossing my bag behind the bar. He didn't push it, just handed me a clean bar towel and went back to cutting limes. But later, when we were alone restocking the back fridge, he bumped my shoulder lightly and said, "Hey, come over tonight, I'll cook." It didn't fix my mood immediately, but it did stop the spiral. After close, I followed him home like I had a few times before, but this time, he opened his door like it was already my place too. He handed me a pair of sweatpants, his, and said, "Shower's free if you want it." When I came out, still drying my hair, the smell of something garlicky hit me. He was in the kitchen, barefoot, shirt hanging loosely off one shoulder, sautéing something in a pan like it was the most natural thing in the world. "What is this, a date?" I teased, leaning in the doorway. "Don't flatter yourself," he said, smirking. "You just look like shit, and I took pity." Wow. Romance lives. He glanced at me over his shoulder, and his smirk softened into something else. Maybe it is a date. Kind of. We ate on the couch, plates in our laps, some terrible reality show playing in the background. At one point, he leaned over and kissed the corner of my mouth like it was the most normal thing in the world, like he'd been doing it forever. That was the moment. That was when I knew this wasn't a fling. This wasn't figuring things out. This was something real, something steady. Later, in bed, he curled around me like he'd been doing it all his life. His hand found mine under the blanket, fingers lacing slowly. "You ever think about what this means?" he asked quietly. I hesitated. "Sometimes. Like, if we keep doing this, are we a thing?" I turned to face him, letting my forehead rest against his again. "Feels like we already are," he smiled. Just a small one, but it lit up his whole face. "Good," he whispered. "I was hoping you'd say that." We didn't have everything figured out, but in that moment, it didn't matter. We had each other. And that was enough. Weeks passed, and things fell into a rhythm. We still worked our shifts at the Lantern, still teased each other across the bar, still kept it low-key around the regulars. But behind closed doors, the lines weren't blurry anymore. Evan didn't hesitate to reach for my hand when we were walking back from the store. He didn't look over his shoulder before kissing me goodbye at the end of the night. And he definitely didn't flinch when I stayed over, even on nights we had to wake up early. The strange thing was how natural it felt. Nothing about it was forced. It didn't feel like we were pretending to be anything. We just were. Of course, there were still moments. Like when Evan's sister randomly stopped by the bar and gave me that look. You know the one. The narrow-eyed, up-and-down scan that said, "Who are you and why do you look so familiar?" from my brother's Instagram stories. We played it cool. Just coworkers. Friends. Whatever. But when she left, Evan leaned against the bar and muttered, "She's gonna ask. She always asks." "And?" He shrugged. "I'll tell her." That made me pause. "Really?" He looked at me, eyes soft but steady. "Yeah. Why wouldn't I?" It hit me then, how far we'd come in such a short time. How, just a few weeks ago, this guy wasn't even sure who he was. And now he was ready to explain us to his family. "I don't know," I said quietly. "Guess I just didn't expect that." He reached across the bar, let his fingers brush mine. "I didn't expect you." Later that night, we laid in bed, wrapped in the quiet. His apartment always felt quieter than mine, something about the way the windows muffled the city noise. Or maybe it was just him curled up beside me, grounding everything. "I used to think I had myself figured out," he said softly. "You know, I had this picture in my head, who I was, what I wanted." I didn't interrupt, I just waited. But then you showed up, and suddenly, I wasn't so sure. I turned toward him, my hand finding his under the blanket. By the time fall rolled around, everything had changed. And nothing had. Evan and I were still the same on the surface. Two guys working a dive bar, pouring drinks, talking shit, cleaning up broken glass and sticky tabletops. The regulars still made crude jokes. The tips were still trash on Mondays. But underneath, everything was different. He wasn't the straight bartender anymore. Not to me. Not to himself either. We started going out more, quiet dinners, weekend hikes, late nights at the little indie theater downtown where the popcorn was stale, but the seats were perfect for holding hands in the dark. Every time, I expected him to pull back, to question things, to freeze when someone looked at us too long. But he didn't. He'd stand behind me, in line at a food truck, hand on my waist. He'd steal a bite of my burger and kiss my cheek before I could complain. And every single time, it made something twist in my chest in the best way. The people closest to us caught on. His sister didn't even ask, just hugged me one day and said, "You make him different." In a good way. That stuck with me. But there were hard moments too. One night, Evan came home quiet. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. "What's going on?" I asked. Sitting beside him, he ran a hand through his hair. "My dad called." I waited. "He doesn't get it." I told him about us. He just didn't know what to say. Then he said a bunch of stuff that didn't sound like support. I reached over, took his hand. "You okay?" He nodded slowly. "I think so. Just hurts more than I thought it would." We sat there in silence for a bit. Then he turned to me. "But I'm still glad I told him. Because for once, I didn't lie. And I don't want to lie about you." It was in that moment I knew, whatever this was, whatever we were building, it wasn't fragile. It had weight, roots. Weeks turned into months. Winter settled in and the city grew quieter. One night, Evan came home late from a class he was auditing on architecture, something he said he might want to pursue full-time. I was half asleep on the couch, wrapped in a hoodie that wasn't mine but smelled like him. He dropped his bag and walked over to me, brushing the hair off my forehead. "You're still here," he said softly. "Of course I am." He nodded, then knelt in front of me, like he needed to be closer. "I think I used to be scared of letting anyone see me, really see me. But you do. And somehow I'm okay with that." I touched his face, thumb grazing his cheek. "Because I love you," I said. He smiled, this full, unguarded smile that made my heart stutter. "Yeah," he whispered. "I love you too." That was it. No fireworks, no grand speeches, just two guys in a quiet apartment, figuring out what it means to be seen, to be chosen, to be loved. "That scare you?" I asked. He shook his head. "It did, but not anymore." That was the first night he said it. Not dramatic, not poetic, just soft, quiet. "I think I'm falling for you." And I smiled, my chest tightening in the best way. "Yeah?" I whispered. "Good, because I've already fallen." There's something about living with someone, not just crashing at their place a few nights a week, but actually sharing a life that changes the air between you. Subtle things, mostly. The way you start leaving your toothbrush next to theirs without even thinking. The way your laundry ends up mixed together. The way your routines bend and shift until you can't remember what life was like before they were part of it. Evan and I weren't officially living together, but it was getting harder to tell where his place ended and mine began. Half my stuff had migrated to his apartment. I had a key. So did he. He'd leave notes for me on the fridge when he left early. Dumb little drawings or inside jokes that always made me smile. And one night, I caught myself looking around his place, realizing it didn't feel like his anymore. It felt like ours. It wasn't perfect. We fought. Not often, but it happened. Like the time he forgot my birthday, not completely, just didn't realize the date until his phone reminded him at noon. I tried to play it cool, said I didn't care, but he could tell it stung. We didn't talk much that night. He went to bed early. I stayed up watching old sitcoms I didn't even like. The next morning, he woke me up with pancakes. No apology speech, no big gestures. Just pancakes shaped like weird hearts, and "I'm a dumbass," written in chocolate syrup on the plate. "I'm sorry," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I suck." But I remembered. Eventually. I didn't even pretend to be mad after that. It was those small things that defined us. Not the drama, not the confusion, but the way he reached for me in his sleep, the way I knew he liked one sugar in his coffee and hated when the TV volume landed on an odd number, the way we just fit. And yet, there was still one conversation we hadn't had, one that hovered in the background like a silent, blinking light. What comes next? It happened on a Sunday. We were off work, rare for both of us, and the city was in one of those rare, quiet moods where even the usual traffic seemed to take a nap. We spent most of the day being lazy. Eggs for breakfast, him reading on the couch while I sat cross-legged on the floor with my laptop, neither of us saying much, but comfortable in the silence. Around sunset, we went for a walk. Nothing fancy, just around the neighborhood, hoodies on, hands brushing, then eventually clasping. It was one of those moments that would have felt small to someone else but felt enormous to me. Because we weren't hiding, not from ourselves, not from each other, not from the world. We reached the top of this little hill that overlooked part of the city, just rooftops and distant noise, but the view was ours. Evan stopped, pulled me to a stop beside him and stared out for a minute. "You ever think about moving?" he asked. I blinked. "Like, out of the city?" "No," he said, turning to me. "Like, in, with me." I stared at him, my heart suddenly loud in my chest. "I mean, you already live at mine half the week," he added, like he had to justify it. "And I hate waking up without you. It's dumb. I know it's fast. You don't have to." "Okay," I said, cutting him off. He blinked. "Wait, what?" "Okay," I repeated, grinning now. "Let's do it." His face lit up with that crooked smile I'd fallen for. "Really?" "Yeah. I'm tired of carrying my charger back and forth." We laughed. Then he pulled me in and kissed me right there under the fading light, and I knew, without a doubt, that whatever came next, we'd face it together. Later, back at our place, I started moving things around in my overnight bag, already making mental notes of what to bring next time I swung by my apartment. Evan flopped onto the couch, feet up, grinning at nothing in particular. "What?" I asked, settling beside him. He turned, resting his head on my shoulder, just thinking about how I used to think I had everything figured out. And now? He looked up at me with that same steady, open expression that never failed to knock the wind out of me. "Now I know I was waiting for you." Thanks for watching. Goodbye.